My name is Walid Shoebat. I was born as a Muslim who desired the destruction of God's people. In trying to disprove the God of the Bible, I actually found him. Now I have dedicated my life to revealing the truth about Islam through books, radio, television, and the internet. In this series, we will discuss biblical end times prophecy and what the God of the Bible has to say about the very days we are living in now.
We meet at a time of great tension between the United States and Muslims around the world. The relationship between Islam and the West includes centuries of coexistence and cooperation, but also conflict and religious wars. I've come here to Cairo to seek a new beginning. The United States will never be at war with Islam.
Name me one that is not Muslim. In every single context where Christ is on earth fighting, he's fighting a Muslim country.
Does the Bible predict such a cataclysmic event with so many Muslim nations? The answer is absolutely yes.
One of the most popular prophecies of the Bible that has captured the attention of prophecy students is the battle of Gog and Magog that is found in Ezekiel 38. The passage speaks of a coalition of nations that attack Israel, who are all led by the nation of Magog. Many prophecy teachers claim that Magog is Russia, which will be destroyed alongside with Islamic nations. This must occur in order to usher in the Battle of Armageddon and the coming of Christ. But these two arguments are unfounded and totally depend on pure conjecture. So is Russia the nation of the Antichrist, or is the Battle of Gog and Magog a separate battle distinct from the Battle of Armageddon? Are Gog and the Antichrist one and the same? Does Gog come from Russia? We will examine the main arguments. The question arises that does not Russia, first of all, arm Muslim nations today? The most common argument for this assumption is that Russia is supplying arms to Iran, that is Persia, and other Muslim nations. But selling weapons does not amount to primary evidence for anything biblical. The United States supplies Saudi Arabia with weapons. They also gave weapons to Afghanistan during the Cold War in order to defeat communism. In doing so, they aided the Mujahideen and indirectly created the Taliban. It was the United States that forced Israel to allow elections for the Arabs in Jerusalem, and now we have Hamasistan in Gaza. The United States also twisted Israel's arm to pull out of Lebanon, and now we have Hezbollah practically ruining that country. The United States under Jimmy Carter gave the cold shoulder to the Shah of Iran and did nothing when Khomeini and the Mujahideen Khalq Iran took over. But do these destructive acts of ignorance tie the U.S. into end times prophecy? Yet in Joel Rosenberg's runaway bestseller Epicenter, it is this type of evidence that is used as the primary support for seeing Russia as the key player in the coming Gog and Magog battle against Israel. But circumstantial evidence cannot be used as substitutes for solid scriptural evidence. Circumstances change, but God's word does not. So does such acts of the United States make them the biblical Gog or the land of the Antichrist? Well, it certainly seems at times that the U.S. is under an Antichrist spell. And Satan certainly wants nothing more than to weaken the somewhat righteous nations that stand with Israel and spread the gospel throughout the earth. But Western naivety and mediocre minds of American politicians would be no match for 14 centuries of Islamic deception. The Bible warned Christians long ago to be wary of their enemies' pathological lies. Quote, be as wise as serpents and as innocent as doves. Matthew 10:16. The only one who knows Russia's future for certain is God. When Russia stood with Nazi Germany, many concluded that Hitler was the European Antichrist. They were wrong. As soon as Stalin was betrayed by Hitler, Russia fought against Germany. If so many prophecy analysts were wrong then, is there a chance that they are also wrong now? During the Cold War, numerous prophecy analysts focused on communist Russia as a major player in end times. Of course, she was. She was the enemy of America, and everyone knows that God is an American, right? But then the superpower collapsed, and its Muslim parts created their own Commonwealth of Independent States, or the CIS nations. Few even pay attention to the fact that they are all mentioned in ancient times in the Bible. Yet all of these nations are today Muslim. But some might ask the question, but isn't Rush mentioned in the Bible, and is not Rush Russia? Well, this controversy has been brewing for years. Much of the controversy revolves around the way that the word Rosh in Ezekiel 38:2 is translated. Some Bibles translate the word as a proper noun, Rosh, and others as the chief prince. Those who argue that Rosh is a proper noun almost universally argue that it is referring to the modern nation of Russia. Others object. Dr. Charles Ryrie, for example, takes issue with the translation of Rosh as a proper noun. He writes, the Prince of Rosh is better translated as the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, while the NASB translate this verse as the Prince of Rosh. In Ezekiel 38 verse 2 and 39 verse 1, a marginal note in 39:1 reads, Chief Prince of Meshech. Yet Meshech and Tubal are not linked with a place called Rosh in any of its other occurrences in the Bible. In Genesis 10:2, 1 Chronicles 1:5, Isaiah 66:19, Ezekiel 27:13. So it is extremely unlikely that in these two cases, Rosh would suddenly take on an entirely different meaning from that used elsewhere in Old Testament. A far more reasonable translation of the Hebrew word Rosh in Ezekiel 38 is head of or chief. The word Rosh appears nearly 600 times in the Bible, and all but once it is interpreted as meaning head, chief, top, best, or something similar. Why then would we make an exception here and translate it as a proper noun? The word Rosh here is the Rosh that we find in the Rosh Hashanah, the chief day of the year, the Jewish New Year. According to Bible scholar Dr. Merrill F. Unger, linguistic evidence for the equation of Rosh with Russia is confessedly only presumptive. So who then is right? Is Rosh a proper noun, or does Rosh mean chief? Now let's examine the identity of the other nations that will be involved in the great battle of Gog and Magog. Magog encompasses Asia Minor, but some prophecy teachers try to claim that Magog is also pointing to Russia. Tim LaHaye, for example, author of the best-selling Left Behind series, points to Josephus' identification of Magog as the land of the Scythians, the ancient northern nomadic tribes who inhabited the territory from Central Asia across the southern steppes of modern Russia. LaHaye's assessment of the Scythians is accurate, yet it proves the point that if Magog is the Scythian territory, then this land mass is in the southern region of the former USSR, but not Russia proper. The problem with using this method to see Russia in Ezekiel's prophecy, however, is that the southern steppes of modern Russia include portions of the former USSR. Still, it is not part of modern Russia proper. These Muslim states split from Russia when communism fell. Ancient Scythia includes the regions of Asia Minor, Turkey, and the several Central Asian states, Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and others. These are all Muslim nations. Analysts that supports that Magog Russia theory uses correct references, but draws faulty conclusions. The theory is based on the assumption that Russia proper would always control the southern Muslim states, but to everyone's surprise, communism fell and the Soviet Union collapsed. The unexpected split seemed not to have affected Western analysts' interpretation of end-time events. Prophecy author, for example, Grant Jeffrey, who also interprets Magog as Russia by quoting Rawlinson, he says, the areas that were ruled by Scythians are located south of Russia and in the southern republics of the Commonwealth of Independent States, the former USSR. Although Jeffrey correctly quotes Rawlinson, he insists on seeing Russia in Ezekiel's prophecy since this theory had become a standard interpretation. The Latin Church Father Jerome says that Magog denotes Scythian nations, fierce and innumerable, who live beyond the Caucasus and the Lake Maeotis and near the Caspian Sea, and spread out even onward to India, which represents the Assyrian Mat-Gugi, or country of Gugu, the Gyges of the Greeks. The Matthew Henry Complete Commentary speaks of this diversity of opinion. Quote, some think they find them, Gog and Magog that is, far off in Scythia and southern Russia. Others think they find them nearer the land of Israel, in Syria and Asia the Less, Turkey. Matthew Henry Bible Commentary. Josephus also points to the Scythians as Magog. Magog founded the Magogians, thus named after them, but who by the Greeks are called Scythians. But again, where was the Scythian territory of Magog? It was not in Russia. The Schaff-Herzog Encyclopedia of Religious Knowledge, citing ancient Assyrian writings, places the location of Magog in the landmass between ancient Armenia and Media. In short, the republics south of Russia and north of Israel, comprised of Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Azerbaijan, Turkestan, Chechnya, Turkey, and others. I agree with these quotes, and I add, these are all Muslim nations. Many prophecy teachers teach that the invading coalition of nations described in Ezekiel 38 and 39 is not the army of Antichrist, but another army entirely led by some other evil world leader who is destroyed prior to Christ's coming to defeat Antichrist. The reason for this view is simply because Ezekiel 38 and 39, which clearly describes a Muslim coalition of nations, does not support their European Antichrist paradigm. For this reason, they are forced to find a way to divorce the battle of Gog and Magog from the main event when Christ returns to the earth for the showdown with Antichrist. Most prophecy teachers claim that Islam will be defeated and out of the scene before Antichrist emerges from Europe as a world leader. Ezekiel 38 is indeed Armageddon for several reasons. First reason is that Israel will be pure. I will make known my holy name amongst my people Israel. I will no longer let my holy name be profaned, and the nations will know that I, Jehovah, am the Lord, the Holy One in Israel. It is coming. It will surely take place, declares Jehovah the Sovereign. This is the day I have spoken of. Number two, the Gentiles also will know God. God himself says, that after the defeat of Gog and his armies, all of the Gentile nations, as well as Israel, will be convicted of their unbelief and will know that he, Jehovah, is God, quote. And so I will show my greatness and my holiness, and I will make myself known in the sight of many nations. Then they will know that I am Jehovah. I will send fire on Magog and on those who live in safety in the coastlands, and they will know that I am Jehovah. The text of Ezekiel 38 describes the heathens as finally knowing who the true God is. The heathen may know me, and thou, Gog, shall come up against my people of Israel as a cloud to cover the land. It shall be in the later days, and I will bring thee against my land, and the heathen may know me when I shall be sanctified in thee, O Gog, before their eyes. How could these be heathen? All these nations in Ezekiel 38 are Muslim nations. Why would the Bible call people who claim to believe in Abraham and Jesus as heathen? To me, this is one dilemma I had when I read the text as a Muslim. I realized that I must be on the wrong side. Worshipping Allah according to the Bible cannot be the same as worshipping Jehovah. You could imagine my dilemma when I first read this. I had to make a choice, Allah or Christ. I chose Christ. This event happens, quote, in the later days, a war between Israel and these heathens. Muslims call us kuffar, heathen, infidels, for we do not believe in Allah. From their perspective, we are unbelievers. We reject Allah and Muhammad. Yet the Bible declares Muslims to be heathen. Islam turns everything upside down. The third reason is that Christ is present. In both battles, Gog and Armageddon, Christ is present with the greatest earthquake. Quote, and all the men that are upon the face of the earth shall shake at my presence. Ezekiel 38:20. Who is present? God is present in the flesh. This is indeed the last battle, with Jesus scoring a great victory on behalf of his people against their enemies. If one doubts that Messiah is on earth, the text in verse 7 should leave no doubt. Quote, and the heathen shall know that I am Jehovah, the Holy One in Israel. Chapter 39, verse 7 of Ezekiel. Did you see that? The Holy One in Israel. Other parts of Scripture use the phrase, the Holy One of Israel. But here, the Messiah is actually present on earth, in the land of Israel. This "in" is crucial. It's like a DNA evidence in a court of law. No serious Bible student can doubt the fact that this event is anything other than the Messiah fighting the Antichrist. We also have verse 19, which states, my fury shall come up in my face. Ezekiel 38:18. This is a literal face. He is furious and angry. Why would it be that his face here is allegory and his feet standing on the Mount of Olives in Zechariah 14 being literal? No Christian can deny that God standing on the Mount of Olives in Zechariah 14 is Christ himself standing on the Mount of Olives. So if he is literally standing on the Mount of Olives with his feet, why wouldn't his face be the literal face in Ezekiel? Why choose one and ignore the other? Not only is Christ present, but the destruction of both Gog and the Antichrist is accompanied by an earthquake of unparalleled proportions. Quote, for in my jealousy and in the fire of my wrath have I spoken. Surely in that day there shall be a great shaking in the land of Israel, so that the fishes of the sea and the fowls of the heaven and the beasts of the field and all creeping things that creep upon the earth, and all the men that are upon the face of the earth shall shake at my presence. And the mountains shall be thrown down, and the steep places shall fall, and every wall shall fall to the ground. Ezekiel 38:19-20. Shake at my presence? In the same verse, we read about the earthquake and his presence on earth. The same earthquake that is in Zechariah 14 when he touches the Mount of Olives. This is not a small event. Every creature on earth will shake at the presence of Christ. The book of Revelation also tells us that this event occurs when Antichrist's army are gathered together against Israel. Quote, then they gathered the kings together to the place that in Hebrew is called Armageddon. And there was a great earthquake, such as was not since men were upon the earth. So mighty an earthquake, and so great, and the cities of the nations fell, and every island fell away, and the mountains were not found. Revelation 16:18-20. Both descriptions in Ezekiel 38 and Revelation 16 tells us that the mountains are thrown down. In other words, no nations are left. Only one kingdom remains, the kingdom of Messiah. Zechariah describes the same event from his own prophetic perspective. Quote, I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle. Then Jehovah will go forth and fight against those nations, as when he fights on a day of battle. And in that day, his feet, Jehovah's feet, will stand on the Mount of Olives, which is in front of Jerusalem on the east, and the Mount of Olives will be split in its middle from east to west by a very large valley, so that half of the mountain will move towards the north and the other half towards the south. Zechariah 14:1-4. When did Jehovah have feet? Zechariah 14 gives both accounts, the final victory of Jehovah God and the great earthquake. Ezekiel 38:19-20 does as well. The war of Ezekiel 38 is massive. Everything about the events indicate that this war is no mere opening act for the Great Tribulation. It is the magnificent capstone of that period and will have a decisive effect on all nations worldwide. If the war of Gog and Magog occurs just prior to Christ's coming and is a separate event from Armageddon, then do we have two separate battles for Christ? One to fight Gog and the other to fight Antichrist? How many comings are there? The return of Christ for this battle is well defined in the book of Joel. Let the nations be roused. Let them advance into the valley of Jehoshaphat, for there I will sit to judge all the nations on every side. Jehovah will roar from Zion and thunder from Jerusalem. The earth and the sky will tremble, but Jehovah will be refuge for his people, a stronghold for the people of Israel. Many Western scholars agree that Zechariah 14 and Joel 3 speak of the coming of Christ. Yet because Ezekiel 38 and 39 describes the names of nations coming for war, and because they do not match the European Western mold, these scholars will separate these verses from their obvious context. They attempt to create a different mold and force the Bible to fit into their mold, rather than forcing their prophetic scenarios to conform to what the Bible says. The book of Revelation, unlike any other book in the New Testament, literally oozes with references, direct citations, allusions, and even many echoes of hundreds of passages from the Old Testament. In fact, nearly every verse in the book of Revelation is found on the Old Testament passage. Can you guess which passage Revelation 19 and the Battle of Armageddon is primarily founded on? You guessed it, Ezekiel 38 and the Battle of Gog and Magog. Nearly every commentary on Revelation that one can find will affirm this fact, except those written by the European Antichrist theorist. They do their best to hide this fact. Another powerful reason to recognize the fact that Gog is the Antichrist is because Ezekiel makes it clear that all prophets speak of Gog. Quote, this is what Jehovah the Sovereign says. Are you Gog, not the one I spoke of in former days by my servants the prophets of Israel. At the time they prophesied for years that I would bring you against them. Ezekiel 38:17. When this event happens, the Lord asks, are you not this one spoken of by the prophets? The word prophets is plural. Many prophets, or even all of them that prophesied prior to Ezekiel. If Israel's prophets speak of Gog and Magog, then where are all these references? If one denies that Gog is the Antichrist, then one will be very hard-pressed to find any of these references without seriously stretching the scriptures. In fact, I have yet to see a single treatment of this subject by someone who claims that Gog is not the Antichrist. But if we take the position that Gog is the Antichrist, it is easy to find numerous passages throughout the prophetic books that mention the Antichrist and his army.